There is a kind of woman who moves like dusk itself, quiet, golden, inevitable. She does not beg for attention. The world rearranges itself to notice her. Men do not simply see her, they remember her. Not with logic, but with something older, something sacred. He does not know what he's looking for, only that her absence feels like an ache stitched into the edges of his mind. When he meets her, this woman of silence and gaze, something ancient inside him stirs. It is not love, not desire, not yet. It is recognition, the kind that burns through the defenses he thought were strength. She does not tell him who she is. She doesn't have to. Every pause in her voice, every movement of her wrist, carries centuries of forgotten language. The language of the anima, the inner feminine that Carl Jung spoke of. He sees in her what he has buried. Softness, mystery, chaos, devotion, wildness. Everything he has exiled from himself now stands before him wearing her face. And this is where the fear begins. For to love her would mean to meet his own soul. To worship her would mean to surrender his illusion of control. He tries to contain her with logic, to name her, to define her, to reduce her into something small enough to own. But she cannot be owned. She belongs to no one, not even herself. She moves through life like a storm that refuses to apologize for its thunder. And in his dreams, she haunts him. Not as a woman, but as a symbol. She becomes the scent of rain before it falls, the reflection in the eyes of a wolf, the half-smile that turns his certainty into dust. He wakes up gasping. He calls it lust. He calls it confusion. But what he really fears is her power to make him see. Because she doesn't ask for love, she provokes transformation. And the ego, in all its fragile armor, trembles before her presence. She is his anima, the divine mirror that returns him to himself. But to reach her, he must die in the ways he knows himself to be. That is why he both fears and worships her. For she is the path through which he will either awaken or be destroyed. He remembers her not as a moment, but as a presence, the kind that lingers like smoke after a sacred fire. When she entered his life, she brought disorder. Not the kind that ruins things, but the kind that strips away illusions. She did not fit into his patterns. She did not respond to his charm the way others had. Her eyes did not flinch at his cold silences, nor did her voice bend to the rhythm of his control. He tried to measure her, to make sense of her contradictions, how she could be soft yet unreachable, warm yet wildly detached. And then it struck him. She was not here to be understood. She was here to initiate him. Every man, Jung said, meets his fate in the form of a woman. And when that woman appears, she does not come to comfort him. She comes to shatter the walls of his ego. Her silence was the mirror in which he saw his own hunger for validation. Her distance revealed the void he had spent years disguising with noise. Her calmness enraged him, because it showed how easily she could exist without his attention. And that, to him, was unbearable. To be irrelevant to a woman who had touched his soul. He called it indifference. But it was mastery, the art of detachment that only the awakened feminine knows. The power to remain present, yet untouchable. He began to feel her everywhere. In the rustle of leaves, in the rhythm of rain, in the stillness between his thoughts. She had become a myth inside his psyche, and he, the unwilling pilgrim of his own awakening. Each time he tried to pull her closer, life pulled her further away, as if the universe itself was conspiring to teach him. That desire without depth is only dependency. He dreamt of her again. This time she stood on the shore, dressed in white, the ocean reflecting her outline like a memory of divinity. She said nothing. She only looked at him, and in that gaze, he saw the 1,000 versions of himself he had never dared to meet. The boy who still craved his mother's approval. The lover who used power to feel safe. The man who feared softness because he thought it was weakness. Her presence was the chaos that burned away his delusion of control. She wasn't destroying him, she was unmaking him. Because only what is undone can ever be reborn. He wanted her body, but she offered him a mirror. He wanted affection, but she offered silence. He wanted certainty, but she offered the storm. And that was her sacred cruelty. The alchemy of the feminine mystery. She does not give him what he wants. She awakens what he needs. It is not comfort that transforms a man, it is confrontation. And she, with her stillness and fire, is both. He begins to realize, this is not love as he understood it. This is a ritual, a sacred dismantling, a call to become something beyond the boy who needs validation, beyond the man who confuses possession with intimacy. The waves crash harder. He falls to his knees, drenched and trembling. Somewhere deep within, the mask breaks. And in the echo of the storm, he whispers her name, not as a plea, but as a prayer. Because now he understands. She was never his to have. She was the threshold he was meant to cross. She is everywhere now. In the spaces between his thoughts. In the pauses between his words. Not as a woman, but as an energy, ancient and uncontainable. She no longer walks beside him. She walks within him. For the first time, he begins to understand what Jung meant when he said the anima is not a lover, but a guide, a torchbearer in the dark tunnels of the soul. She is the force that drags him back into his own depths, into the emotional graveyards he buried under logic and pride. Every time he reaches for her image, he feels something vast staring back, not her eyes, but his own reflection in them. That is the terror of the feminine mystery. It doesn't seduce the ego, it dismantles it. It pulls a man into his own psychic labyrinth, until he is forced to face the ghosts that still command his love. He begins to see it now. Every woman he ever chased was a projection of what he refused to meet within himself. Her grace reminded him of his own forgotten tenderness. Her confidence revealed his own insecurity. Her silence reflected his restless hunger for control. The more he idealized her, the more distant she became, because he was never truly seeing her. He was only chasing his disowned soul in human form. And she, wise as the unconscious itself, refused to play that game. The divine feminine does not exist to feed a man's fantasy. She exists to awaken his wholeness. Every time he longed for her, she disappeared. Every time he tried to own her, she slipped through his fingers. Until one night, in the quiet ache of loneliness, he realized she was never running away. She was leading him back to himself. It is the cruel mercy of the anima, to wound the man until he stops confusing love with possession. He begins to see the pattern, the obsession, the longing, the ache. It was all an invitation, a coded message from his own shadow. She was the myth that called him into his own initiation. And when he finally looks within, he sees her, radiant and calm, sitting in the center of his psyche. No longer a goddess to be worshipped, but a presence to be integrated. The moment he stops chasing her out there, he meets her in here. And in that reunion, something sacred begins to dissolve. His arrogance softens. His fear turns to reverence. His desire becomes devotion, not toward her body, but toward the mystery she represents. He understands now that the true feminine is not a woman's face, but the eternal movement of the soul, the chaos that births creation, the silence that speaks truth, the beauty that cannot be owned. The feminine mystery does not belong to him. It belongs to the cosmos itself. And yet, she allows him glimpses, moments of stillness where time folds, and he feels her breath not on his skin, but in his spirit. That is why men fear her, because to truly see her is to lose every illusion of control. But that is also why they worship her, because through her, they meet the divine within themselves. He is no longer chasing her shadow. He is listening for her song. And that makes all the difference. The masculine within him, once rigid and armored in pride, has begun to dissolve into something softer, something deeper, wiser, ancient. He has stopped reaching for control. Now he reaches for understanding. The feminine mystery, once a haunting, now feels like a horizon, endless, alive, ungraspable, but somehow merciful. When a man stops trying to possess the feminine, he begins to perceive her, and perception is the first act of reverence. She appears again, not in a dream, but in the realness of the morning. Her eyes no longer seem to promise, they reveal. He realizes, finally, she was never meant to fill his emptiness. She was meant to mirror it. In her presence, his ego loses its crown, and something sacred takes its place. A humility that feels almost divine. Because she is not impressed by his armor. She is drawn to his awareness. The moment he stops performing strength and starts embodying stillness, she leans closer, not because she's conquered, but because she recognizes something rare. The man who has met his shadow and survived it. She knows the difference between confidence and consciousness. One seeks attention, the other radiates silence. And in that silence, she feels safe enough to unfold. This is where the real alchemy begins. Not in seduction, not in conquest, but in witnessing. When the masculine truly sees the feminine, without demand, without fear, without fantasy, the universe exhales. Because every myth of union, from Isis and Osiris to Shiva and Shakti, was never about lovers meeting in flesh. It was always about energies merging within. He looks at her and sees not a woman, but a world. And she looks at him and sees not a man, but the mirror that reflects her infinity. They do not touch. They don't need to. Something invisible between them burns. It is not lust. It is recognition. The kind of knowing that says, I remember you, not from this life, but from the beginning of time. The masculine bows, not to her body, but to her mystery. And she smiles, not as reward, but as acknowledgement, because the feminine does not surrender to dominance. She responds to awareness. It is not submission, it is resonance. It is the meeting of two forces that have traveled through lifetimes of illusion. Just to remember this truth, love is not possession, it is perception. In this moment, they are not two beings. They are consciousness dancing in polarity. He realizes now, the reason men fear her mystery is because they sense what it demands, the death of the false self. To approach her truth, he must burn away everything that is not love. And so he lets go of control, pride, of the stories that once made him feel powerful. And in that surrender, he becomes the very thing he once sought. He once believed awakening would be a victory, a triumph of knowledge, a reward for his pursuit. But the truth is quieter. It feels more like loss. Because to awaken to the feminine mystery is to lose the world you thought you understood. He walks through familiar streets, but everything has changed. Or perhaps he has. Every woman's face now holds a depth he never noticed before. Every glance, every silence, 1,000 hidden galaxies. He understands, now, that the feminine was never something to decode. She was the mirror to his own unconscious. And that realization both liberates and haunts him. The mystery he once feared, the one he tried to possess, now moves through him like breath, untamed, gentle, eternal. He no longer seeks to own her. He seeks to honor what she awakens within him. But this new awareness comes with a price. Because once you've seen the divine in another, you can never again love superficially. Every touch must mean something. Every silence becomes sacred. Every connection, an echo of something infinite. This is why the mystery of the feminine terrifies the masculine. Because to love her truly means to be stripped bare of ego, of control, of every illusion of dominance. She becomes the initiation, the passage between manhood and consciousness. Those who cannot face themselves will call her chaos. Those who are ready to awaken will call her grace. For in her presence, he is confronted with his duality, the warrior and the child, the protector and the destroyer, the seeker and the lost. And only through her reflection can he reconcile the two. When the feminine moves through life with awareness, she is not looking for a man to complete her. She is the mirror that completes him. But she, too, changes. The awakened feminine no longer tries to fix, nurture, or prove. She stands as a mirror and lets his soul decide whether it can face its own reflection. This is her power. She does not chase. She attracts. She does not explain. She embodies. She does not beg. She becomes. And this becoming, this quiet radiance that expects nothing and commands everything, is what haunts him most, because she has learned the sacred art of detachment, not the cold withdrawal of bitterness, but the radiant detachment of the awakened. She no longer needs to be chosen. She has chosen herself. And that realization cracks something inside him. He begins to see that love was never meant to be control. It was meant to be reflection, the dance of two souls meeting themselves through one another. This is why men dream of women who vanish, why they chase the ones who cannot be possessed, why the mystery that stands in silence lingers longer in their hearts than the one who offers everything, because what the masculine truly desires is not the body of the feminine. It is her light, her unreachability, her divine restraint. She is the question he cannot answer, the paradox he cannot solve, the prayer he cannot forget. In every age, men have tried to name her goddess, muse, siren, witch, but she is none of those things. She is simply the part of the universe that refuses to be owned, the part that says, I am here to remind you of what you've forgotten, your own soul. And once a man sees her through that lens, nothing else satisfies. No conquest feels complete. No affection feels real. No possession feels enough. Because once he has glimpsed the divine feminine, he can no longer settle for the ordinary. He becomes haunted not by her absence, but by the truth she revealed, that love is not found in ownership, but in awareness. He once thought her silence was surrender. He mistook her softness for compliance, her patience for waiting, her distance for weakness. But the more he reached for her, the more she slipped between his fingers, like smoke, like spirit, like a haunting that does not belong to this world. Because she is not a woman who can be owned. She is a force that can only be met. And those who meet her must face not her beauty, but themselves. In the sacred geometry of the psyche, she is Eros, the creative fire that ignites transformation. The man who worships her, fears her, and desires her, is not worshipping her flesh. He is worshipping what she awakens in him. That silent storm that demands he shed the false armor, that he confront the wounds he has hidden under conquest, pride, and intellect. He fears her because she threatens the illusion that he is in control. For when he looks into her eyes, he sees no reflection of his status, no echo of his validation. He sees only his truth, raw, trembling, unadorned. And in that unbearable moment, he realizes something ancient. That the feminine mystery is not a mirror for the male ego. It is the abyss where the ego dies. Where the mask of the conqueror falls. Where he meets the boy inside him who never learned how to be loved without performing strength. She is not here to complete him. She is here to confront him. To pull him back from the delusion of dominance and into the trembling ecstasy of connection. In her gaze, there is no safety for the man who lives in pretense. Only the call to descend, deeper, darker, closer to the divine fire within his own soul. He will resist it. Every man does. Because the moment he surrenders to the feminine, he is stripped of the illusions that built his identity. He becomes naked in a way that no physical undressing could achieve. Emotionally exposed, spiritually disarmed. But the paradox is this. The very thing he fears losing in her presence, his power, is the thing that is reborn in her recognition. For true power does not dominate. It contains. And the masculine, when purified through her reflection, learns this truth, that the feminine is not chaos to be controlled, but creation to be cherished. And so she remains untamed, not because she rejects love, but because she refuses to shrink love into ownership. Her mystery is her boundary. Her grace is her rebellion. Her stillness is the temple where only the brave dare enter. To the man who fears her, she is dangerous. To the man who worships her, she is divine. But to the man who understands her, she becomes home. Because he no longer seeks to possess the feminine. He seeks to understand her, to learn her language of silence, to stand beside her flame without trying to cage it. And in that sacred equilibrium, not as halves seeking completion, but as wholes reflecting eternity. When the masculine and feminine meet beyond illusion, something ancient awakens. It is not romance. It is not seduction. It is alchemy, the transmutation of two souls remembering their original wholeness. In the beginning, there is tension, a magnetic pole, a divine opposition, sun and moon, fire and water, order and chaos. Each carries what the other has forgotten. He, the structure without softness. She, the flow without form. And when they collide, the world trembles, because their meeting threatens everything false within them. He approaches her as one might approach a sacred flame, with hunger, yet hesitation. Her light is too pure for the unready heart. Her silence, too deep for the noisy mind. And yet he cannot turn away, because somewhere within her stillness, he senses the echo of his own lost soul. The union they seek cannot be found in the body first. It begins in the psyche, where his anima calls out, and her animus listens. In Jung's sacred language, this is not man and woman. It is the eternal dance of energy, the merging of opposites that births the self. The feminine teaches him how to feel, and the masculine teaches her how to focus. Together, they create consciousness itself, light born out of shadow. But the union is not gentle. It burns, because everything false must die before the true can merge. She, with her intuition like moonlit fire, sees the boy still clinging to his pride. He, with his gaze like forged steel, sees the girl still chained to her fear. And so, their love becomes the crucible. Every unhealed wound rises to the surface. Every projection collapses. Every illusion is set aflame. To the uninitiated, this looks like destruction. But to the soul, it is purification. He learns that love is not possession, but presence. She learns that surrender is not submission, but power. And together, they discover a language older than words. The language of breath, silence, and heartbeat. When he finally stops trying to fix her, and she stops trying to soften herself for him, something miraculous happens. They meet in truth. He no longer sees her as a fantasy to conquer, but as a mirror that reveals his divine potential. She no longer sees him as a savior or threat, but as the sacred witness of her unfolding. This is the alchemy Jung spoke of, the Konjunktio, the sacred marriage of the inner opposites, where the fire of the masculine does not burn, but warms, where the water of the feminine does not drown, but nourishes. And in that moment, both realize, love was never about finding someone to fill the emptiness. It was about remembering the wholeness that has always been. She, the moon that teaches him reflection. He, the sun that teaches her radiance. Together, they rise, not as lovers alone, but as embodiments of the eternal dance between consciousness and creation. The world sees only their union, but the truth is deeper. They have become a bridge between realms, a living symbol of what every soul longs for, integration. And in their silence, the universe exhales. Because through them, something infinite has been remembered. The sacred truth that when masculine and feminine stop fighting for control, they become one unending current of divine equilibrium. Even after union, the shadow waits, silent, patient, breathing beneath the skin of everything they believe is healed. It emerges not as a monster, but as a whisper, a memory of hunger, a flicker of control, a longing that still carries the scent of fear. Because even as he worships her mystery, he still fears the depth of her chaos. And even as she opens to his strength, she still resists the weight of his gaze. Desire, that ancient twin of destruction, begins to stir again. The union that once burned golden now trembles at its edges. He looks at her, not as the mirror of his soul, but as the mirror of his weakness. She looks at him, not as the sacred masculine, but as the shadow that could consume her. And in this moment, both realize, love alone cannot silence the unconscious. Jung once wrote that the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. It demands not sentiment, but confrontation. It does not vanish when you fall in love. It only changes its shape, wearing desire like perfume, hiding within the intimacy it pretends to offer. He dreams of her again, but now her eyes are not kind. They accuse. They expose the parts of him that still seek power instead of presence. In the dream, she walks toward him, light spilling like liquid over her skin. And every step she takes makes him feel both aroused and afraid. She whispers, "You want to possess what you cannot contain." And with those words, he wakes, trembling, lost in the memory of her absence. Meanwhile, she feels it too. An invisible pull, the way his energy still touches her even across distance. It is not romance, it is resonance, the echo of something unresolved between their shadows. Because no matter how sacred the union, the unconscious always demands balance. If the light grows too blinding, the dark must rise to meet it. And so the dance continues, not in harmony, but in tension. He tries to stay conscious, but desire begins to twist his perception. He starts to imagine her as the source of his torment, forgetting that she only ever reflected what was already there. She senses the shift. Her body tightens. Her intuition whispers of danger, not physical, but spiritual. She has been here before. The edge where love turns into dependency, where devotion becomes hunger, where admiration becomes need. But she has changed. She does not retreat this time. She watches him, not with fear, but with knowing. She sees the battle raging inside him, the way the ego clings to her as proof of its worth. She does not rescue him. She does not explain herself. She becomes silence, the silence that breaks illusions. In that silence, he feels everything: the loss, the emptiness, the rage of being denied what he once believed was his. And yet, it is in this crucifixion of desire that his soul begins to awaken. Because every man must face the truth that what he loves in a woman is the reflection of his own unlived life. Every longing is a teacher. Every ache is a mirror. The feminine, in her mystery, never seeks to be owned. She seeks to awaken. And so she lets him burn, not as punishment, but as purification. He will emerge changed, or he will retreat into numbness. That choice is his initiation. She walks away not out of indifference, but out of devotion to the sacred law of becoming. Because the true feminine does not anchor herself in the comfort of his desire. She dwells in the temple of her own soul, where no man can enter without shedding his illusions. There she waits, not as a prize, but as a presence. Not as the echo of his fantasy, but as the embodiment of truth itself. And in the quiet space between them, something cosmic begins to shift. The shadow of desire has done its work. The illusion has cracked. And through that crack, light begins to pour. Cold, searing, merciful. The love that once felt like possession now begins to evolve into reverence. Not the kind that binds, but the kind that frees. Because to truly love the feminine is to die to every version of yourself that believed she could be contained. And to truly embody her mystery is to stand unflinching in the face of a man's hunger, and show him, gently, devastatingly, that what he seeks is not her body, but his own soul reflected through her grace. There comes a night when his silence turns from pride to prayer, when the ache of her absence no longer feels like punishment, but like initiation. He sits alone, no longer surrounded by the noise of conquest or distraction. The mirror of her mystery has done its sacred work. It has stripped him bare, torn away every illusion of control, and left him face to face with the emptiness he once called strength. This is where the resurrection begins. Not in victory, but in surrender. For the masculine does not awaken by conquering the feminine. He awakens by bowing before what he cannot understand. He begins to see that the chaos he feared in her was never her chaos at all. It was his own unclaimed emotion, his own vulnerability, his own hunger for depth disguised as dominance. And now, with his ego fractured and his armor gone, he begins to feel what he spent a lifetime avoiding: the raw, unfiltered pulse of his own soul. This is the moment Jung called the descent into the underworld. The ego dies here, not through humiliation, but through revelation. He realizes that what he once tried to control was the very thing meant to transform him. The woman who walked away was never his enemy. She was his mirror. She carried the keys to the chambers of his unconscious. And when he tried to own her, the keys disappeared. Now, in his solitude, he discovers them again. Not in her body, but in the silence she left behind. That silence becomes a teacher. It shows him that love is not possession. That desire without consciousness becomes suffering. That to worship the feminine is not to devour her, but to protect the mystery that lives within her. And so he begins to rebuild, not his pride, but his presence. He learns to listen more than he speaks. He learns that strength is not loud. It is steady. It is the kind of strength that can stand in the fire of rejection, and not collapse into resentment. He learns to hold his desire without trying to cage it, to let it move through him, as wind moves through trees, felt but never forced. This is the rebirth of the masculine soul, the sacred transformation from domination to devotion. He no longer seeks the feminine to fill his void. He seeks her to reflect his fullness. And she, somewhere beyond him, feels it. The thread between them, invisible yet alive, hums differently now. No longer heavy with his need, but steady with his awareness. When she dreams of him again, he is no longer a shadowed figure chasing her through corridors of memory. She stands still, quiet, grounded, luminous. And for the first time, she does not need to turn away, because his presence no longer threatens her freedom. It honors it. This is the divine reunion that Jung hinted at, the sacred marriage of the Anima and Animus, the reconciliation of inner opposites. But here's the secret. It was never about her changing him. It was about her leaving enough space for him to meet himself. The man who rises from the silence is not the man she left behind. His love no longer drains her, it nourishes. His eyes no longer seek to own, they understand. His words no longer seduce, they soothe. He becomes the embodiment of calm power, the kind that does not chase, the kind that does not demand, the kind that holds the feminine mystery as sacred, because he finally holds his own inner world as sacred too. And she, in turn, softens. Not because she is conquered, but because she feels safe. Safe to expand, safe to express, safe to love without losing herself. This is the alchemy of awakening, the moment when both masculine and feminine cease being opposites, and become reflections of one truth, that the divine does not belong to either. It lives in the dance between them. He now walks the world differently. The same man, yet not the same at all. There is a gravity in him that was not there before, a stillness that does not beg to be seen, but is felt by everyone who encounters him. He no longer seeks the feminine to prove his power. He seeks her because he understands her role in his evolution. She is the mirror, the muse, the mystery, and he is finally ready to meet her not with fear, but with reverence. And when they meet again, perhaps in this lifetime, perhaps in another, there will be no chase, no chaos, no game. There will only be recognition, for she will see in him the same stillness she once cultivated in herself, and he will see in her the reflection of everything he became to deserve her presence. This is not love as fantasy. This is love as initiation, sacred, grounded, alive. And in that sacred silence, both finally understand, the feminine mystery was never meant to be solved. It was meant to awaken. And through her awakening, he was reborn. There is a dawn unlike any other. It rises not in the sky, but behind her eyes. The woman who once trembled beneath the weight of longing, now walks through her own silence, as if it were a cathedral built from the bones of her becoming. She is no longer waiting to be seen. The need for witness has dissolved, burned away in the sacred fire of her solitude. Where she once searched for reflection, she now radiates light from within. The world that once told her to be soft, now kneels before the softness that could not be broken. Her silence, once mistaken for surrender, has become her crown. Her patience, her weapon. Her tenderness, her revolution. This is the divine feminine in her final form. Not the maiden who seeks, nor the lover who heals, but the goddess who remembers. She remembers the beginning, when she was whole before the world split her into halves, when her worth was not tied to desire, and her beauty did not need eyes to exist. She remembers that her power was never meant to dominate, but to awaken. In the stillness of her remembrance, the universe itself seems to bend. Men who once chased shadows of her reflection now pause, caught in the gravity of her presence, not because she lures them, but because she no longer tries. There is a haunting in her calm, the kind that stirs something ancient in the hearts of men. It whispers of the eternal feminine that dwells beneath every name, beneath every story of love and loss. Carl Jung once said that every man carries within him an image of the eternal woman, the Anima, his inner feminine, the doorway to his own soul. And when he meets a woman who embodies even a fragment of that truth, he mistakes her for salvation. But she knows better now. She understands that she is not his cure. She is his mirror. She is the embodiment of his forgotten self, the part of him that weeps for beauty, for meaning, for belonging to something larger than power. And so, she no longer fights to be understood. Her life has become her language, her energy, her declaration. Every gesture, every silence, every breath is an act of worship, not to him, but to the divine pulse that moves through all things. When she walks, she moves like memory. When she speaks, time slows. When she loves, it is without ownership, without fear, for she has learned the rarest truth of all, to love without needing to be loved back. This is her final liberation, to no longer define herself by reflection, but by radiance. And yet she feels him still, the man who once broke upon her mystery, not as an ache, but as a whisper that hums beneath her ribs. He exists now as archetype, not as longing, the eternal masculine, reborn through her absence. He has learned to stand in reverence, to hold without gripping, to admire without consuming. He has faced his shadow, and through that descent, he has learned to see her not as mirror, but as mystery. When their eyes meet again, in dream or in waking, there is no language left between them, only silence. But in that silence, universes unfold. He bows not to her form, but to the space she represents, the unnameable, the feminine that cannot be possessed, only encountered. And she, in turn, does not bow. She simply is. For the goddess does not lower herself to meet the divine. She reminds the divine of where it came from. The stars above tremble in acknowledgement. The air grows dense, alive with the invisible. For when the masculine bows in awareness, and the feminine stands in remembrance, the world becomes whole again. It is here that the great circle closes, the eternal dance between shadow and light, between chaos and order, between need and knowing. She turns toward the horizon, not in search of something new, but in devotion to what she already carries, the wild, pulsing, eternal feminine. And the narrator's voice, low, reverent, timeless, drifts like smoke through the edges of the screen. In every woman lives a goddess the world once feared. In every man, the ache to kneel before that forgotten altar. The mystery between them is not a curse. It is the heartbeat of creation itself. And when both awaken, neither rules, neither follows. They remember. Then, silence. A silence that lingers like the echo of a cathedral bell at dawn. The music fades. The imagery dissolves into gold and shadow. Only one line remains, floating like a spell across the screen. She was never his to own, only his to awaken. Before this story fades into silence, let the weight of what you've just felt settle deep within you. Because what you heard tonight was not merely a story, it was a reflection of your own becoming. A mirror held up to the parts of you that the world told to quiet down, to soften, to shrink. But you are not meant to be small. You are not meant to beg to be seen. You are meant to be felt. If this message stirred something ancient in you, if it reminded you of your power, your worth, your sacred right to walk in mystery, then let that remembrance continue. Headphones subscribe to this channel, not as an act of following, but as a vow to yourself. A vow to rise deeper into your own shadow and light. Each film here is a journey through the psyche, a sanctuary for the woman reclaiming her essence, and for the man learning to meet her with reverence. Kendall, leave a comment, not for noise, but for connection. Write what awakened inside you. What truth did your soul whisper back while listening? And when you share this video, you are not spreading content. You are passing fire. You are helping others remember what they, too, have forgotten. This is not entertainment. This is initiation. And you, yes, you, are already walking the path back to yourself. So stay, breathe, and remember, the world changes every time a woman remembers her power, and a man chooses to honor it. Soft closing whisper. Until the next story, walk in your mystery, and let them wonder how silence learned to speak through you.